I've always been proud of the bond my son, Tyler, and I share. At 39, I'd like to think I've managed to strike a decent balance between being his dad and someone he can actually talk to. Ever since the divorce 5 years back, life hasn't exactly been a walk in the park, but Tyler and I have built something solid. We've become a team. One challenge at a time, we've figured things out together. Raising a teenage boy on my own wasn't part of the grand plan, but when life threw that curveball, I stepped up. No hesitation. When Tyler started showing interest in girls, I was the one he turned to. Everything from how to shave without butchering his face to dealing with emotions, I walked him through it. Some talks were a little awkward, sure, but I welcomed them. I wanted him to know he could come to me about anything, no judgment. Tonight was one of those nights. He was sitting at the kitchen counter, stirring his hot cocoa with a little grin playing on his lips, like he was turning something over in his head. Then, out of nowhere, he blurted it out, "Ava kissed me." His face went bright red. I couldn't help but smile. "And? How was it?" He laughed nervously, running a hand through his already messy hair. "Good. Actually, kinda amazing. But I was so nervous. I don't even know if I did it right." "There's no right way to kiss someone," I told him, keeping my voice steady. "What matters is that it felt right to you." He nodded, mulling it over, and before I knew it, we were deep in a half-hour conversation. We covered everything: first dates, why communication matters, even the little things about relationships that most people don't talk about. Seeing him so eager to understand made me proud, even if I had to fight the urge to tease him about how ridiculously awkward teenage boys can be. A few days later, Tyler came to me with a different kind of concern. He stood by the couch, shifting from one foot to the other, obviously wrestling with something. "Dad," he started, voice uncertain, "Ava invited me to sleep over." I just raised an eyebrow. "Her parents won't be home," he added. "It'll just be us." And there it was. I set my book down and patted the cushion next to me. "Come sit." He hesitated, then flopped down, picking at the hem of his shirt. I don't want to mess up," he admitted. "I mean, we kissed, but this feels different. What if I do something wrong? What if I make her uncomfortable?" His honesty made me smile. I squeezed his hand, letting him know I was listening. "First off, the fact that you're even thinking about her comfort says a lot about you." Tyler sat quietly, absorbing my words. I took a second before continuing, choosing my next ones carefully. These moments can be exciting, but they also come with responsibility. "Feeling unsure? That's normal." He gave a small nod. "You know what matters most?" I asked. "Respect. Boundaries. Talking to each other. If you're not sure about something, just ask. Yeah, it might feel awkward, but it shows you actually care." He frowned a little. "But, what if she expects me to just know what I'm doing?" I shook my head. "Nobody expects you to be an expert. And if she does? Maybe that's a sign you two need to slow down." He exhaled, leaning back against the couch. "I think I get it." "Good." I smiled. "Now, one more thing. If she's not into it, whatever it is, that's okay too. No hesitation. No pressure. Relationships are about trust, and sometimes the most important thing you can do is listen." He nodded again, looking thoughtful. "Yeah. Makes sense." I gave his shoulder a firm squeeze. "You're gonna be fine, kid. And if you ever need to talk, I'm always here." A small smile pulled at his lips. "Thanks, Dad. I don't say it enough, but I really appreciate you being there for me." That one hit me right in the chest. I nudged his arm, keeping it light. "Well, you're my only kid. You make it pretty easy to be proud." Tyler groaned, cheeks turning pink. All right, don't get all sentimental on me." He rolled his eyes but grinned anyway. "So, do you think I'm ready for this? More than you were before, I told him. And that's all you can do, just go in with a good head on your shoulders. The next evening, I watched him head out, hair neatly combed, nerves practically buzzing off of him. I stood by the door, arms crossed, heart a little heavier than I expected. My boy, no, my young man, was stepping further into adulthood. And all I could do was hope I'd prepared him enough to handle it. That evening, as I sat alone in the quiet house, I couldn't help but wonder how things were going. It wasn't just idle curiosity, it was that instinct deep in my gut, the one that made me want to make sure everything was going smoothly for him. I had to fight the urge to text, reminding myself that he needed space to figure things out on his own. It wasn't until the next morning that I finally heard the familiar shuffle of Tyler's feet in the hallway. I glanced up from my coffee as he wandered into the kitchen, his hair a mess, still wearing the same clothes from the night before. Well? I asked, lifting an eyebrow. He snatched a piece of toast from the counter, plopped down across from me, and grinned sheepishly. It was good. I mean, we didn't, go all the way or anything. But we talked a lot. I told her I was nervous, and she admitted she was too. It actually felt nice, just being honest with her. I smiled, a warm pride swelling in my chest. That's great, Tyler. Sounds like you handled everything exactly the way you should. He shrugged, though the slight pink in his cheeks told me he was pleased with himself. I mean, I still have a lot to figure out, but last night made me realize something. He paused for a moment, clearly turning the thought over in his mind. I waited, letting him take his time. Relationships aren't just about, what people think they're about. It's more about trust, about feeling comfortable with someone. That matters more than anything else. I nodded slowly, letting his words settle in the air between us. Yeah. That's a pretty big thing to understand at your age. He gave a small, almost embarrassed laugh, rubbing the back of his neck. Guess I've got a decent teacher. I chuckled, shaking my head. Hey, I just hand out the advice, you're the one actually putting it to use. He smirked and took another bite of toast, his mind still half lost in whatever thoughts had been running through his head since last night. And as I sat there, watching my son, my young man, grow into himself, I felt something shift. This wasn't just about one conversation or one night. It was about all the little moments that shaped him into the kind of person he was becoming. Someone thoughtful. Someone respectful. Someone who understood that love, in whatever form it came, was about more than just excitement, it was about understanding and care. And in that moment, I knew I had done something right. That's the thing, Tyler, I said, giving him a reassuring smile. It's not about getting everything perfect. It's not about saying the exact right words at the exact right time. It's about being there with her, really being in the moment together. If she likes you, she won't care if you're a little awkward. Trust me, she's probably just as nervous as you are. His expression softened, and I could see the tension in his shoulders ease just a little. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes. He was starting to understand. Starting to believe it. But there was still something lingering in his eyes, some doubt that hadn't quite faded. His voice was quieter this time, hesitant. But, what if she doesn't want to? I met his gaze, making sure my voice was steady and firm. Then that's okay too. That's just as important to understand. You never want someone to feel pressured or uncomfortable. Relationships, any kind of relationship, are built on trust, respect, and knowing when to listen just as much as knowing when to speak. Tyler gave a small nod, pressing his lips together in thought. I could practically see the gears turning in his head. After a long pause, he let out a breath and said, "Yeah. I think I get it now." His voice had a little more confidence in it this time. I reached over, giving his shoulder a squeeze. "You're gonna do just fine, kid." My voice was soft but certain. "And if you ever feel unsure, or just need to talk something through, you know I'm always here." A tiny smile pulled at the corner of his lips, and the worry in his face melted away just a little. Thanks, Mom. His voice was quieter now, almost like he was embarrassed to say it out loud. I don't think I say it enough, but I really appreciate you being here for me. With all of this. It means a lot. I felt something tighten in my chest, one of those rare, fleeting moments when I knew I was doing something right. I nudged his shoulder playfully, trying to keep it light. Well, you're my only kid, I teased. I'd say you make it pretty easy to be proud of you. Then I smirked. But don't let it go to your head. Tyler laughed, shaking his head. A slight blush crept up his neck as he glanced away, clearly embarrassed by the compliment. All right, he muttered with a grin. Let's not get all sentimental here. I chuckled. Fine. Now, are you ready for your big night with Sophie? He nodded, exhaling slowly. More ready than I was before, he admitted, standing up and stretching. I'll just try to remember everything you said. I gave him an encouraging smile. That's all you can do. The next evening, Tyler left the house just as the sun was starting to set. His hair was neatly combed, his shirt freshly ironed, and there was an unmistakable nervous energy buzzing around him. I watched him go, feeling that familiar tug in my chest, the bittersweet mix of pride and nostalgia. My boy, no, my young man, stepping further into the world of adulthood, one moment at a time. As the hours passed and the house settled into a still, almost unnatural quiet, I found myself wondering how things were going. Not just out of curiosity, but that deep, unshakable instinct, the one that wanted nothing more than for him to be happy, to have a good time, to learn and grow from whatever the night had in store. I resisted the urge to check in, knowing he needed space to figure things out on his own. It wasn't until the next morning that I heard the familiar shuffle of his feet in the hallway. I glanced up from my coffee as he wandered into the kitchen, hair messy, clothes still the same from the night before. That told me enough, he'd stayed out later than planned. I raised an eyebrow, keeping my face neutral, though the curiosity was impossible to hide. Well? I asked, letting the question hang between us. Tyler grabbed a slice of toast from the counter and slid into the chair across from me, a small, sheepish grin on his face. It was good, he said, his voice quieter than usual but carrying a note of relief. I mean, we didn't, go all the way or anything. He glanced up quickly, almost like he needed to make that part clear. But we talked. A lot. I told her I was nervous, and she admitted she was too. It was actually nice. Just being open with her. Like, we didn't have to rush anything. We were just talking. And that made it feel more real, I guess. A warm pride swelled in my chest. That's wonderful, Tyler, I said, my voice full of genuine approval. Sounds like you handled everything exactly the way you should. Being honest, listening to her, that's what matters most in any relationship. He grinned a little wider, and I could see the tension he'd been carrying finally lift from his shoulders. Thanks, Mom, he murmured, his expression sincere. I'm glad we talked about it before. It really helped. I smiled to myself, knowing that our conversation had made all the difference. Sometimes, all it took was a reminder, to him, that he had nothing to prove, and to me, that he was figuring things out just fine on his own. He shrugged, the faintest tint of pink dusting his cheeks. I mean, I still have a lot to figure out, but last night made me realize something important. I tilted my head, intrigued. Oh. Tyler hesitated for a second, then smiled, small, but real. I think I'm starting to get it now. And just like that, I knew. He was growing up. It was nice, Tyler said, his voice casual, maybe a little too casual. But the way his eyes lit up told me there was more to the story than he was letting on. I raised an eyebrow, leaning against the counter. Yeah? He shrugged, reaching for a glass of water. We just talked, about everything and nothing. And I don't know, it just felt really good. Comfortable, I said thoughtfully, nodding. Comfortable is good. Sounds like you two are finding your rhythm, getting to know each other better. Yeah, he admitted, taking a sip of water. She's easy to talk to. I think I'm starting to understand her a lot more now. I watched him as he spoke, noticing something different about him, something subtle but undeniable. The way he moved, the ease in his voice, the quiet confidence that hadn't been there before. He was changing, growing, settling into himself in a way that caught me off guard. And yet, as proud as I was, there was something else, too. A quiet ache, a strange kind of longing for a time when things were simpler between us, before he started stepping into a world that didn't revolve around me anymore. That's great, Tyler, I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. I'm really happy for you. Truly. He smiled then, a real, easy smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Then, setting his glass down, he leaned against the counter, his posture relaxed. It's because of you, you know, he said, almost too casually, but there was weight in his words. The things you said, they really helped. I felt more prepared going into it. Something tightened in my chest, an unexpected pressure that I couldn't quite name. It wasn't sadness, not exactly. But it was something close. I'm glad I could help, I managed to say, though the words felt heavier than they should have. Like they didn't quite fit everything I was feeling. The rest of the day passed in a strange sort of haze. It wasn't that anything was different, not really. But suddenly, I was aware of him in a way I hadn't been before. Every small movement, every sound, every offhand comment, it all felt amplified, like I was seeing him through a different lens. At dinner, I caught myself watching him. Too much. Too often. I tried to focus on the conversation, the usual talk about school, his friends, the little complaints about his day, but my mind kept wandering. There was this quiet pull in my chest that I couldn't shake, something I didn't want to examine too closely. Later, as I was scrubbing the last dish, lost in thought, I heard footsteps behind me. I glanced up just in time to see Tyler lingering in the doorway, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His expression was unreadable. Thanks for dinner, Mom. It was really good, he said, his voice soft but sincere. I turned back to the sink, keeping my focus on the dish in my hands. You're welcome, I said simply, rinsing off the soap, pretending like my mind wasn't tangled in thoughts I couldn't quite place. There was a pause, and I could feel his eyes on me, the weight of his gaze pressing against my back. You okay? Tyler asked after a long moment. His voice was quiet, careful, too careful. Like he knew something was off but wasn't sure if he should push. I turned to face him, forcing a smile, hoping it looked real enough. Course. Just tired, I guess. I shrugged like it was nothing, like the knot in my chest wasn't tightening with every second that passed. He didn't argue, just nodded slowly. But his eyes lingered on me a little too long, like he was trying to read between the lines, to figure out what I wasn't saying. All right, he said after a beat. I'll let you get some rest. I watched him go, waited until I heard the soft creak of his bedroom door closing before I let out a long, shaky breath. My chest felt tight, like something inside me was pushing against the edges, threatening to spill over. I didn't know what was wrong with me. Why did his presence, just him being near, stir up this strange, tangled mess of emotions? The lines between pride, nostalgia, and something else I couldn't quite name felt blurred, like I was standing at the edge of something I didn't understand. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind a storm of thoughts I didn't want to unpack. Tyler was my son, the boy I had raised, loved, and poured every part of myself into. But he wasn't a boy anymore. He was growing into his own person, stepping into experiences and emotions I hadn't felt in years. Maybe that was the problem. It wasn't jealousy. Not exactly. It was something deeper, something harder to name. A quiet kind of longing, not for him, but for something he reminded me of. A version of myself I had lost somewhere along the way. The way he spoke about Sophie, the way he was stepping into this new phase of life, it all stirred up something I wasn't ready to face. I turned onto my side, squeezing my eyes shut. I needed to let it go. Whatever this feeling was, I had to push it down, lock it away. Tyler needed a mother, not whatever this was. But deep down, I knew the truth. Something had shifted. And I had no idea how to handle it.